ever stop to think about what was around before life even flickered into existence? We're not talking about, stars and planets, but something more fundamental, something that made life and maybe even, well, this moment of you listening possible.
It's a truly compelling question, isn't it? It takes us right to the edge of our current understanding.
Yeah.
We often think of life as the starting point, but what if something deeper was already in play?
Exactly. And this kind of mind-bending curiosity, it actually came directly from you, the listener.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, you sent us down some fascinating paths with sources like consciousness and immortality, necessary condition for evolution, and is chance or choice the essence of nature?
I remember looking through those. They definitely raise some big questions.
They do. And they aren't light reads, but they all sort of circle around this incredible idea. Is consciousness somehow linked to something ancient, maybe even universal?
These sources really challenge us, yeah.
Yeah.
To look beyond the familiar biological explanations.
For sure.
And our aim here, well, it isn't really to provide concrete proof that feels like a bit of a stretch with questions this big.
Right. Probably impossible right now.
Probably. Instead, we want to sort of trace the logic within these ideas, see where they connect, and hopefully spark some of those aha moments for you.
Okay, sounds good. Let's dive in then. How about we start with something that sounds simple, but gets complicated fast. Consciousness itself.
Good starting point.
One of the sources defines it as a system of information processing that is aware of itself. Now, we use computers all the time, right? They process tons of information. What's the real difference here?
Well, that's the key, isn't it? That aware of itself part. A computer, yeah, it can crunch numbers, manage incredibly complex systems, even simulate a conversation, like you said.
Yeah.
But does it have that internal experience of doing it? Does it have preferences, opinions, concerns? Does it feel like anything to be that computer?
No, I guess not.
The source argues that's the crucial missing ingredient, that self-awareness.
Right, okay. It's not just about the data shuffling around. It's about the experience of it all, that sort of inner you that's present.
Precisely.
And this leads us nicely into the role of information in biology. It seems so basic, but the sources really stress that it's foundational.
Oh, absolutely. The necessary condition for evolution piece really hammers this home. Just think about a simple seed.
Yeah.
A carrot seed always grows a carrot, right? Not a turnip, not an oak tree.
Right, hopefully.
That reliable transmission of instructions, that information being passed down accurately through generations, that's what allows life not just to continue, but also to adapt and, well, evolve.
No, information isn't just like a side effect of being alive. It's the actual engine driving the whole thing.
That's the perspective, yeah.
And here's where it gets, for me, really interesting. For information to even exist in a useful way, one source argues it has to be structured. It needs a code. It has to be encoded.
That's a critical step in the logic.
Yeah.
Imagine just trying to send a message using random noise or static.
Mm-hmm.
It wouldn't mean anything, right? Information needs a framework, some kind of system for storing it and then retrieving it accurately later. And in living things, this encoding is, well, it's incredibly precise and reliable.
Like DNA, right? This unbelievably complex code that holds the whole blueprint for an organism.
Exactly like DNA.
And the fact that it gets copied so faithfully generation after generation is why life can maintain its form and function.
Which brings us to that classic puzzle.
The chicken or the egg? Which came first?
Exactly. If you need this reliable transfer of encoded information for both reproduction and evolution, then logically, the system that does the encoding, the system that allows information to be structured and passed on, it had to be in place before you could have the first reproducing organism or the first evolving one.
Whoa, okay.
So the source makes a pretty bold claim here. The ability to encode information reliably came first, before the chicken, before the egg.
That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? So the capacity to organize information isn't just something life developed. It might be a fundamental property that was already there. Like, I don't know, a cosmic operating system just waiting for life to boot up.
That's one way to think about it, yeah. It definitely broadens the scope way beyond just our little planet.
Which is another point made, right? We need to think bigger.
Precisely. Consciousness and immortality makes that point very clearly. If we only look at Earth, we might be missing the bigger picture entirely. Life and consciousness from this viewpoint really should be understood within the context of the whole universe.
The whole universe, okay. And when we look at it that way, we bump into this fascinating, maybe slightly out there idea
Go on.
that the universe itself might have had the ability to process information at a quantum level, like right from the very beginning, from the Big Bang.
It's a fascinating parallel, isn't it? Because right now, here on Earth, we're pouring resources into building quantum computers.
Right, trying to harness those weird quantum rules for process.
Exactly. We're trying to leverage quantum mechanics for information processing. So the source then asks, if the universe has had these capabilities all along, potentially for billions of years, isn't it plausible it's been using them?
Okay, but there's a catch, according to the source. This idea, the universe doing its own quantum info processing, it's often kind of ignored or banned from consideration in mainstream science. Why would that be?
Well, the explanation offered goes back to the early days of quantum physics, the 1920s and 30s.
Okay.
When scientists were first grappling with subatomic particles, electrons, and so on, they ran into behavior that just seemed inherently random, unpredictable. This led to developments like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which is essentially a powerful mathematical tool for calculating the probabilities of quantum events, accepting a kind of fundamental fuzziness.
So it works for making predictions even though we don't fully get what's happening underneath, like a statistical average?
That's a good way to put it. It's incredibly useful. But the source suggests this focus on randomness and probability might have inadvertently steered science away from looking for deeper, perhaps deterministic, information processing happening at that quantum level.
It sort of averaged out any underlying order.
That's the argument. It became the dominant view, the dogma almost, making it really difficult to even explore alternatives that suggested underlying order or computation.
The source even brings up Einstein's famous quote, "God does not play dice." He wasn't comfortable with that randomness either.
He certainly wasn't. But crucially, neither Einstein nor anyone else at the time could propose a viable, testable, alternative explanation for why things looked random.
Ah, okay. So without a better theory.
Without a better theory, the probabilistic view solidified. However, the source argues that doesn't mean the underlying quantum information processing stopped. It just means our current models might not fully capture it.
And this potentially opens the door to thinking about consciousness differently, not just as something our brains cook up.
Exactly. If there's this universal quantum information field or process, could our consciousness be connected to it or even emerge from it?
Which leads directly to that massive question, where is consciousness actually located? And the source brings up some really provocative points here, starting with the work of a highly respected neurosurgeon, Professor Wilder Penfield.
Oh, yes. Penfield's work is fascinating. After decades of stimulating the brains of conscious patients during surgery,
Right, mapping out functions.
he apparently concluded that the source of our subjective awareness or consciousness wasn't actually in the brain tissue he was probing. He couldn't find the seat of consciousness there.
That's a pretty significant conclusion from someone with his experience.
It is. And then, of course, we have the phenomenon of near-death experiences, NDEs. Often controversial, but the accounts are striking.
What do those accounts typically suggest about where consciousness is?
Well, many people who've been clinically dead, heart stopped, brain activity ceased and then revived, they report being fully conscious during that time. They describe observing events accurately, sometimes from a vantage point outside their physical body, like floating near the ceiling. Some even report moving through walls or objects. If you take these accounts at face value, they strongly suggest that consciousness can, at least temporarily, function independently of a working physical body.
It definitely challenges the simple idea that the brain creates consciousness, doesn't it?
It certainly does.
And the source then takes us on a bit of a historical detour, looking at the Gospel of Thomas. Why bring in an ancient text like that?
The connection made is quite direct. The Gospel of Thomas opens with a very potent line. Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death.
Not taste death, okay.
So source links this to the narrative of Jesus' resurrection, suggesting maybe the core message wasn't just about belief, but about understanding something fundamental about consciousness that allows it to transcend physical death.
And this text was suppressed for a long time.
Yes, along with others like the Book of Thomas. They were rediscovered relatively recently in the Nag Hammadi library find. The source implies their suppression might have been because they contained teachings deemed, well, problematic by established powers.
And the interpretation offered in the source is that these hidden teachings were often specifically about consciousness, how it works, how it evolves, how to maybe advance it.
That's the perspective presented, yes.
Mm.
That avoiding death in this context refers to achieving a level of conscious understanding and evolution that moves beyond physical limitations.
Which, in a way, ties into that near-universal concept of a soul or spirit,
Yeah.
right? Found across so many cultures and times.
Exactly. It's quite remarkable how persistent and widespread that idea is. You find it everywhere, this belief in a non-physical aspect of ourselves that carries our essence, our awareness, and continues after the body dies. The source argues that such a deeply ingrained cross-cultural belief probably didn't just spring out of nowhere. It likely originates from some kind of perceived reality, perhaps fleeting experiences or deep intuition, suggesting our awareness can function separately from the physical form.
The sheer consistency is thought-provoking.
It really is.
Yeah.
Which then leads to the next logical question. If there is some kind of non-physical carrier for consciousness, what could it possibly be made of?
And the source offers a candidate, electrons.
Yes. Which sounds strange at first, I know. We think of electrons zipping around wires carrying charge.
Right, basic physics. How could they relate to something as complex as consciousness or the soul?
Well, the source points out a few things. First, the sheer abundance of so-called free electrons in the universe and even around our bodies, think static electricity.
Okay.
Then it introduces a specific idea attributed to someone named Thao that our individual soul or conscious entity might be composed of a vast number. The figure given is 4 times 10 to the power of 21, so 4 followed by 21 zeros of electrons.
That's an astronomical number.
It is. And critically, these electrons are proposed to be quantum entangled.
Ah, entanglement, meaning they're linked right. What happens to one instantly affects the others, no matter the distance.
That's the core idea of entanglement, yes.
Right.
So if our consciousness is somehow encoded within this massive entangled system of electrons.
Then we wouldn't be isolated individuals necessarily.
Exactly. It suggests our consciousness is inherently connected, an inseparable part of the universe's broader information processing system, perhaps that quantum system we discussed earlier. It could potentially explain both our unique subjective experience and a deeper connection to everything else.
Okay, let's connect this back to immortality. Our physical bodies clearly are mortal, they wear out, but electrons.
Electrons, as fundamental particles, are considered incredibly stable, practically indestructible under normal circumstances. They can persist through conditions that would destroy complex biological matter.
So the carrier, this electron cloud, might live forever, so to speak.
The carrier might be extremely resilient, yes. But the source makes a crucial distinction. While the electrons themselves might endure, the information encoded within them, our consciousness, our memories, our personality, that can change. It's not static.
So it's like the hardware is durable, but the software can be rewritten.
That's a decent analogy. And the source suggests that we are the programmers through our thoughts, our choices, our actions.
So our daily lives are actively programming this conscious field. And this has implications for achieving some form of immortality.
That's the line of reasoning. The idea is that aiming for immortality isn't just about the electron structure persisting, but about the quality and coherence of the information it holds. Actions seen as detrimental, causing harm, dishonesty, hindering conscious growth in ourselves or others, are viewed as negative programming.
Whereas positive actions, things beneficial to the whole system, contribute to a more stable, perhaps enduring conscious structure.
Precisely. Beneficial programming for the entire universe, essentially.
This seems to connect with the idea of reincarnation, which the source also touches upon. How does that fit into this picture of conscious development?
Well, it's presented as a potential mechanism to address apparent unfairness. Why are some people born into loving families, others into extreme hardship? Reincarnation offers a framework where consciousness continues its development across multiple lifetimes, learning and evolving through different experiences.
And it incorporates consequences.
Yes, the idea of karma or consequences is often linked. Suffering caused to others might need to be experienced or understood from the other side, creating a kind of cosmic balancing or learning mechanism.
The source quotes, "For there is nothing hidden that won't be revealed," suggesting maybe this universal information system keeps track somehow.
That's the implication, that ultimately everything comes to light within this larger conscious framework. And the overall purpose of physical existence, from this perspective, is fundamentally about spiritual or conscious development.
Okay, these are some pretty big conceptual ideas. How could we even begin to, verify any of this? Is there any way to detect this soul or energy field the source talks about?
This brings us to the topic of electro-photonics. You might have heard it called GDV, Gas Discharge Visualization, or bioelectrography.
I've heard the terms, yeah. Kirlian photography is related, right? Capturing glows around things.
It stems from that lineage, yes. But modern electrophotonics uses sophisticated sensors and computer analysis. The basic idea is to measure and interpret the faint light photons emitted by electrons when the area around the body is stimulated by a brief electromagnetic field.
So we know we have static electricity, free electrons around us. This is trying to capture light emitted by those electrons.
Essentially, yes. Capturing this electrophotonic glow and analyzing its patterns. Proponents claim these patterns correlate very strongly with a person's physiological and even psychological state.
And the source mentions high clinical accuracy.
It states that electrophotonic diagnostics have shown accuracy levels over 95% in some clinical studies, which is quite remarkable if true.
But the really interesting part for this discussion is whether this glow originates just from the physical body or if consciousness plays a role. What evidence is offered for that?
Several intriguing observations are presented. One is that after clinical death, the specific diagnostic information related to diseases the person had seems to vanish from the glow patterns, even though the physical evidence is still present in the corpse.
Suggesting the information wasn't purely physical.
That's the inference drawn. Another point is the fear effect. Someone intensely afraid of having a certain disease can apparently show electrophotonic patterns similar to someone who actually has the disease.
Whoa. Mind over matter reflected in the glow.
Or perhaps consciousness influencing the field, yes.
Yeah.
And maybe the most startling claim is evidence suggesting that measurable changes appear in this electrophotonic field during decision-making processes, slightly before the corresponding activity shows up in standard brain scans like EEG.
Before the brain activity. That really implies consciousness might be primary, interacting with the brain, not just generated by it.
It's definitely presented as strong evidence for that view.
So what happens to this electrophotonic activity after death, according to the research cited?
The source references research, particularly by Dr. Konstantin Korotkov, who used electrophotonics to study bodies after death.
Okay, what did he find?
A key finding was that some form of identifiable connection measured through this electrophotonic activity and attributed to the departing consciousness seemed to persist for a period after clinical death, potentially up to 72 hours.
72 hours, 3 days. That resonates with some religious traditions, like the time before Jesus' resurrection.
That connection is explicitly noted in the source material, yes.
And within that time frame, could the glow patterns tell anything about how the person died?
Apparently, yes. The research suggested that the dynamics of the glow, how it changed over those hours, differed based on the probable cause of death. Accidents, murder, suicide, natural causes, each seemed to leave a distinct energetic signature.
Any particular cause stand out?
Suicide was reported to produce the most vivid and intense electrophotonic activity in the hours after death.
Really? Why might that be?
The speculation offered is that it might reflect a sudden, perhaps shocking, realization of this situation by the consciousness, maybe even a desperate, energetic attempt to somehow reverse the event or return.
Wow, that paints quite a picture. Consciousness as this energetic informational field interacting with the body, possibly persisting beyond it, which naturally brings us to the ultimate question. Could the universe itself be conscious?
If there's this fundamental universal capacity for quantum information processing, as the source suggests, is it self-aware? Does the universe know itself? The source poses this question directly.
And if it is, this conscious universe could be what various traditions have tried to name.
Holy Spirit, living Father, Great Spirit, Great Intellect, Creator, God the Source, lists these as potential names for this overarching conscious reality.
So if the universe is conscious, what might its purpose be? Why all this complexity, this evolution?
The suggestion put forward is elegantly simple, in a way. The purpose might be the continued evolution of consciousness itself, at all levels, from the smallest spark to the universal whole.
The universe evolving its own awareness through us and everything else.
That's the grand perspective offered, which leads us to a final crucial point from the source material about the real danger we face.
Okay. If physical death isn't the ultimate end for an evolved consciousness, what is?
The death of the physical body, the source argues, isn't the ultimate catastrophe, especially if consciousness can persist. The real danger lies in how we live our lives now.
How we program our consciousness.
Exactly. How we shape that informational field through our choices, our intentions, our actions, day to day. That programming, according to this view, has lasting significance, potentially affecting our conscious journey far beyond this single lifetime.
That puts a lot of weight on our everyday thoughts and actions.
It certainly does.
Well, you embarked on this deep dive with us, perhaps looking for a different perspective, maybe some answers, maybe just more interesting questions. We hope these ideas, sparked by the materials you shared, have given you some real food for thought.
And maybe even challenge some existing assumptions, which is often where the most interesting explorations begin.
Definitely. So here's a final thought to leave you with, something to mull over. If consciousness is indeed a fundamental aspect of the universe, this vast system constantly processing and encoding information, what responsibility does that place on each of us? How are we shaping not only our own individual consciousness, but maybe contributing to that larger universal information landscape? What kind of information are you putting out there?